Russia just offered to build Iran a complete nuclear fuel cycle, and the reason America has said absolutely nothing about it is not what you think. This morning, Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear energy corporation, confirmed in a statement to Reuters that it has formally proposed constructing a full nuclear infrastructure package for Iran, not a single reactor, not technical assistance, a complete fuel cycle, uranium enrichment facilities, fuel fabrication plants, reprocessing capability. And here's the phrase that should have triggered every alarm in Washington. Rosatom's deputy director Kirill Komarov said, and I want you to hear the exact words, "We are prepared to offer our Iranian partners a comprehensive solution that ensures energy sovereignty and eliminates dependence on external fuel supplies." Energy sovereignty. That is diplomatic code. What it actually means is this. Russia is offering to give Iran the infrastructure to enrich uranium, process plutonium, and fabricate fuel rods entirely on its own soil without needing to import a single gram of fissile material from anyone ever again. The same infrastructure that can power a nuclear energy program can, with modifications that take months, not years, produce weapons-grade material. Every port, every facility, every centrifuge in this package. Tehran, Bushehr, Arak, Natanz, Fordo. A complete indigenous nuclear supply chain built by Russia, paid for by oil swaps and yuan-denominated credit lines that bypass every Western financial system. Before I show you why this is not about nuclear energy and why America's silence is the most calculated move Washington has made in this entire crisis, if you are following stories where the surface explanation is a lie and the real story is 3 layers deeper, you should be subscribed right now. Hit that button because this situation is moving faster than any news cycle can track, and it is not slowing down. Here is what every headline got wrong today. They covered this as a nuclear proliferation threat, Russia helping Iran get the bomb. And yes, it is that. But if you stop there, you miss the entire point. Russia offering Iran nuclear infrastructure is not news. Russia built Iran's Bushehr reactor in 1995. Russia has been selling nuclear technology to Iran for 30 years. Russia offering to expand that relationship is not a development, it is a continuation. The news is not the offer, the news is the timing, and the news is the silence. Because Russia did not make this offer in a vacuum. Russia made this offer exactly 72 hours after the US and Israel announced they are preparing a joint military framework to strike Iranian nuclear sites if the ceasefire collapses. 72 hours. That is not coincidence. That is a signal, and the signal is not aimed at Iran. Russia is not talking to Tehran with this offer. Tehran already knows what Russia can provide. Tehran and Moscow have been in nuclear negotiations on and off for 3 decades. Russia announcing a nuclear package to Iran is not information for Iranian ears. Russia is talking to Washington. Russia is talking to Tel Aviv. Russia is talking to Brussels. And Russia is saying this: if you strike Iranian nuclear facilities, we will rebuild them. If you destroy their enrichment capability, we will replace it. If you set their program back 5 years, we will compress that timeline to 18 months. Your military option has an expiration date now, and that expiration date is the day our construction crews arrive in Natanz, and those countries heard it. The Financial Times reported this week that U.S. officials held an emergency classified briefing with Senate Intelligence Committee members on Wednesday. The topic, according to 2 people familiar with the meeting, was not Iranian nuclear capability. It was Russian nuclear cooperation with Iran and whether American military strikes would be, quote, strategically obsolete before they are operationally executed. Read that again. The question being asked in closed-door sessions in Washington is whether the military option against Iran's nuclear program is already dead. Not because Iran is too strong, because Russia has made the program unkillable. That is not a proliferation problem. That is a strategic checkmate dressed up as an energy deal. Now here's the thing that made my stomach drop when I cross-referenced the timeline this morning. As of right now, today, May 8, 2025, 72 hours after Rosatom's announcement, the United States has issued no public condemnation of the offer, no statement from the State Department, no emergency UN Security Council session, no presidential tweet, no Pentagon briefing on what happens if Russia transfers enrichment technology to a state the US has spent 2 decades trying to keep non-nuclear. Nothing. And before you say that is just back-channel diplomacy, that Washington is handling this quietly, let me tell you what that silence actually costs. Israel is watching that silence. Saudi Arabia is watching it. The UAE is watching it. And they are all asking the same question right now. If Russia delivers centrifuges to Natanz next month, is America going to stop them? Or is America so focused on managing the ceasefire, avoiding escalation with Moscow, and keeping China neutral that it will let this happen? That uncertainty, that specific question going unanswered, is exactly what Russia wanted to create. Russia's nuclear offer is not an energy deal first. It is a diplomatic wedge. Russia is trying to fracture the coalition, pressuring Iran by making America choose. Confront Russia directly over nuclear transfers and risk the entire ceasefire framework collapsing, or stay silent and watch Israel lose faith that America will actually prevent a nuclear Iran. And here is the brutal part. It is working because America is simultaneously managing a ceasefire that expires in 11 days on May 19th, negotiations with Iran running through Oman and Qatar, a coordinating mechanism with Israel that is fraying after the settlement announcement last week, intelligence sharing agreements with Saudi Arabia and the UAE that depend on U.S. credibility, and now a Russian nuclear offer that makes the military option against Iran potentially worthless while demanding an American response that America cannot afford to give. America has a full plate, Russia knows it, and Russia just put a grenade in the middle of that plate and walked away. But America's silence has a second dimension that goes far deeper. And to understand it, you need to understand something that almost nobody in mainstream coverage has connected to this morning's offer. Let me give you one number, just one, and I want you to sit with it for a second. In 2015, when the Iran nuclear deal was signed, the JCPOA, Iran had approximately 19,000 installed centrifuges. Under the deal, Iran agreed to reduce that to 6,000 and cap enrichment at 3.67%. Far below the 90% threshold needed for weapons-grade uranium. In exchange, sanctions were lifted, inspectors were allowed in, the program was frozen. Today, May 2025, Iran has more than 60,000 centrifuges installed across multiple sites. It is enriching uranium to 60% just weeks of technical work away from weapons grade. It has stockpiled over 600 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, announced in March that Iran has enough fissile material for 12 nuclear warheads if it chooses to enrich further and weaponize. 12 warheads. From 0 under the deal to 12 in a decade. How is that possible? How does a country go from the most restrictive nuclear monitoring regime in modern history to being a threshold nuclear state in 10 years? 2 words. Inspections collapsed. After the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, Iran began kicking out inspectors. After Israel assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists in 2020 and 2021, Iran disabled monitoring cameras. After the U.S. began bombing Iranian facilities in February, Iran ejected the remaining IAEA staff entirely. The entire inspection architecture that was supposed to prevent exactly this scenario disintegrated piece by piece. And every time a piece fell, Iran took another step toward weaponization, and nobody stopped it, not because they did not want to, because the tools they built to stop it, sanctions, inspections, diplomatic pressure, all depended on a framework that no longer exists. And now Russia is offering to make Iran's nuclear program completely sanctions-proof. Here is how that works. Russia builds the facilities on Iranian soil using Russian engineers and Russian technology. That means no imported components that can be sanctioned. Russia supplies the fuel using Russian uranium from Russian mines processed in Russian facilities. That means no dependency on global supply chains. Russia trains Iranian engineers in Russian institutions and embeds Russian advisors in Iranian sites. That means knowledge transfer that cannot be blocked by export controls. And Russia finances the entire package using oil for infrastructure swaps and credit lines denominated in rubles and yuan, not dollars. That means no exposure to SWIFT, no vulnerability to Treasury sanctions, no leverage for Washington. This is not a nuclear deal. This is a sanctions bypass system dressed up as an energy partnership, and Russia has been building systems exactly like this, in exactly this way, for exactly this moment, for over a decade. After the U.S. sanctioned Russia in 2014 for Crimea, Russia began constructing what analysts call sanctions-resilient infrastructure. Bilateral trade in national currencies, energy swaps instead of cash payments, technology partnerships with states the West cannot pressure. Russia sold S-400 missile systems to Turkey, a NATO member, and paid in lira and gas credits. Russia built nuclear reactors in Egypt, Bangladesh, and Turkey, and financed them with Russian loans that do not touch Western banks. Russia has been road testing sanction-proof models in a dozen countries so that when this exact situation arrived, when the West tried to isolate a Russian partner, the playbook was already written. And now Russia is handing that playbook to Iran. Now, here is where Russia's strategy connects directly to what happened this morning. Russia's offer to build Iran a fuel cycle is only credible if Russia believes it can survive the consequences. If Russia transfers enrichment technology to Iran, the US will escalate, Europe will escalate, Israel may act unilaterally. Russia needs to believe it can absorb that pressure. The reason Russia believes it can is because of one country, China. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that China has blocked 3 consecutive attempts by the US and Europe to pass a UN Security Council resolution condemning Russian nuclear cooperation with Iran. 3 consecutive vetoes in closed sessions. China is not just protecting Russia diplomatically. China is protecting the entire architecture of sanctions-resistant partnerships that Russia, China, and Iran have spent 15 years building together. Because here is what almost no one has said out loud yet. If Russia gives Iran nuclear fuel cycle independence, Iran will not need China's help evading oil sanctions anymore. Iran will not need dark fleet tankers. Iran will not need yuan-denominated shadow banking. Iran will have Russian infrastructure, Russian financing, and Russian diplomatic cover. That makes Iran less dependent on Beijing, and yet China is protecting the deal. Why? Because China is not protecting Iran. China is protecting the precedent. If Russia can build a sanctions-proof nuclear infrastructure for Iran and the US cannot stop it, then that same model works in Venezuela, it works in North Korea, it works in Syria, it works in Myanmar. The US loses the ability to use sanctions as a tool of coercion against any state that has Russian or Chinese backing. The unipolar financial architecture that America has used to enforce its foreign policy for 30 years becomes irrelevant. That is what this nuclear offer is actually about, not 12 warheads in Iran, not the end of sanctions as a geopolitical weapon. Let me give you a framework for understanding why Russia made this offer now and not 6 months ago or 6 months from now. Because it did not happen randomly. Think of it as an escalation clock. Every time the US takes a step toward military action against Iran, Russia moves 1 hour forward on that clock. And every hour forward is a new capability Russia offers to make US military action less effective. Watch the sequence. February, the US bombs Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordo and Natanz. Russia condemns it but takes no action. March. The US announces a naval blockade of Iranian oil exports. Russia begins sending dark fleet tankers into the Gulf to pick up Iranian crude. April, the US and Israel announce joint military planning for follow-on strikes. Russia delivers advanced S-400 missile defense systems to Iran that make airstrikes significantly more costly. May, the US schedules another round of strikes contingent on ceasefire collapse. Russia offers to rebuild everything the US is about to destroy. Each move is a counter-move. But the counter-moves are not symmetrical. They are exponential. Russia is not just replacing what the US takes away. Russia is making the entire strategy of taking it away pointless. That is not deterrence. That is negation. And here is the question that mainstream coverage is completely bafflingly failing to ask. If Russia is willing to transfer fuel cycle technology to Iran, if Russia is willing to risk US and Israeli retaliation to protect Iran's nuclear program, if Russia is coordinating with China to block any international response, then what is America's strategy for addressing Russia's role? Specifically, the ceasefire targets Iran, the military planning targets Iran, the sanctions target Iran. But Iran's ability to advance its nuclear program while under the most intense pressure in its history is not purely Iranian ingenuity. It is Russian infrastructure, Chinese financing, and a 15-year-old sanctions evasion architecture that was built specifically to survive American pressure exactly like this. A strategy that treats this as a US-Iran problem is a strategy that is trying to stop a forest fire while ignoring the people handing out gasoline. And those people are not passive. Russia pressed Iran to accept the initial ceasefire in March. According to reporting from May 6th, Russia is in direct communication with both Washington and Tehran daily. Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov met with China's Wang Yi in Beijing on Tuesday. The readout from that meeting, published by China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, included this line: both sides reaffirmed their commitment to supporting Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy and opposing unilateral coercive measures. Peaceful nuclear energy, that is the exact phrase Rosatom used in this morning's statement. Russia and China are using synchronized language. That is not coincidence, that is scripting, and America is treating them as mediators, not participants. The White House was asked directly about the Rosatom offer at yesterday's press briefing. The press secretary said the administration is, quote, reviewing the reports and had no further comment. You cannot credibly threaten military action to prevent an Iranian nuclear weapon while simultaneously saying you are reviewing reports that another nuclear power is offering to make that military action irrelevant. That is not strategic ambiguity. That is strategic paralysis. And Israel heard it, Saudi Arabia heard it, Iran heard it, Russia heard it. 11 days, that is what is left before the ceasefire expires on May 19th. And the next 72 to 96 hours are going to tell you everything about which direction this goes. If America formally responds to Russia's nuclear offer publicly, specifically with named consequences for Rosatom, for Russian officials, for any state facilitating nuclear transfers, that tells you Washington has decided to confront Moscow directly, that it is willing to risk the ceasefire to stop the fuel cycle deal, that it believes the nuclear threat is existential enough to justify a direct US-Russia escalation. If America stays silent and works back channels through Geneva, through Ankara, through Doha, that tells you Washington is betting on a diplomatic package that includes Russian guarantees, that America is willing to accept some level of Russian involvement in Iran's program in exchange for caps, monitoring, and a longer breakout timeline, that America has concluded the military option is no longer viable and is searching for an off-ramp that saves face. And if America starts treating this as a US, Iran, Russia, China problem, if the next round of sanctions targets not just Iranian entities but Russian nuclear firms and Chinese banks financing the oil swaps, if Biden or Blinken names Moscow and Beijing explicitly in the next 72 hours as co-responsible for nuclear proliferation, then you are watching something genuinely new. America finally naming the actual structure holding this entire system together instead of pretending it is just Tehran acting alone. I do not know which of those three America chooses. Nobody outside a very small room in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing knows right now. What I do know is this. Russia's nuclear offer this morning was not the story. Russia's offer was the symptom. The story is the system behind it. The sanctions evasion networks, the dual-use technology pipelines, the yuan and ruble financing mechanisms, the diplomatic coordination at the UN, the decade-long construction of an alternative international architecture designed specifically so that when this moment came, when America tried to stop a nuclear Iran, America would discover it no longer had the tools. This crisis did not build that system. This crisis just turned the lights on so the rest of us could finally see it. And what you are watching right now, Russia offering Iran a full nuclear fuel cycle, America saying nothing, Israel panicking quietly, China blocking every resolution, a ceasefire fraying with 11 days on the clock, is what that system looks like when it is fully, quietly, deliberately operational. One offer, two silences, 11 days left. Watch the State Department briefing today. Watch whether Israel holds its scheduled cabinet meeting on Iran that was rumored for Thursday. Watch what Rosatom says or deliberately does not say in the next 48 hours. Watch whether China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs echoes the peaceful nuclear energy line again, because repetition in diplomatic language is coordination. Because in this story, silence is not caution. Silence is calculation. And right now, there are two silences that matter. Russia is silent on timelines. When do the construction crews arrive? When does fuel shipment begin? When does technology transfer start? No dates given. And America is silent on consequences. What happens if Russia proceeds? What happens if the first centrifuge is installed? What happens if Iran reaches breakout capability with Russian help? No answers given. Two silences, two calculations, and the space between them is where the next war starts or the next deal gets made. If this gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening than anything else you have read today, share it with one person who is trying to make sense of this. And if you want to be here when the ceasefire deadline hits on May 19th, because this is about to move very, very fast, subscribe and turn on notifications right now. I will be breaking down every major development as it happens, every move, every counter move, every silence. Do not miss it.